Hello, and welcome to the Family Histories Podcast, a show for and about those of us who have sat quietly in libraries, archives, and spare rooms all around the world, tirelessly piecing together our collective social and family history. My name is Andrew Martin, I'm a family historian, and I'll be your host. In this episode, the Marchioness, we'll be hearing about a woman who was one of the leading figures in culture and politics during the Italian Renaissance, and then we'll be on the hunt for the origins of an 18th century Italian baroness. So, put down that old apprenticeship record, grab a cuppa, and let's meet our guest. My guest today is a family historian who has traced his roots back to Italy, and through his research he became an author of the book Farmers and Nobles, the genealogy history of two Italian-American families. You might also recognise him as the host of the Italian Roots and Genealogy podcast and YouTube channel. So, before I'm given the boot, I should introduce my guest. It's Bob Sorrentino. Hello, Bob. Welcome to the Family Histories podcast.
Hi, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here. I was looking forward to this.
It's great to have you here. As usual, we start with the same question, and that is, how did you get hooked on researching your family history?
That's an interesting story because when I was growing up as a little boy, way back when, in the 50s, my mom and dad had the old style photo album with the black pages and the little corners that you would put photos in.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And one of the things that was in there was what I refer to as my great-grandfather's calling card.
Okay.
It's about the size of an index card. And on it, it had his name, Nicola Piermalo. And it said from the Duchi di Capricota, which means from the Dukes of Capricota.
Ooh.
And my mom would always tell me that he was a duke or a count of some sorts.
Wow. Okay.
So when I started really doing my research about 15 years ago, that's where I started with his name, Nicola Piermalo.
Okay.
And I thought I might find a little something interesting here and there on him, not expecting to find much, to be honest with you.
Right.
And the very first thing that popped up was a family history of the Caracciolo family, which is a very famous family in Italy that dates back to 950 in Naples.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I saw his name, Nicola Piermalo, and he married Emilia Caracciolo. I had never heard that name before. But my father was Nicholas, named after him. My oldest aunt was Emilia, so in the Italian tradition, it matched up.
Yeah.
The year they got married made sense. They were married in 1882. My grandmother was born in 1883.
Okay, sure.
So I called my cousin who lived with my grandmother, and I said, have you ever heard this name before, Caracciolo? And she says, oh, of course. That we call my grandmother Nanny. That's Nanny's mother. And I said, did you know about this family? And she said, well, she would say that there was a saint in the family and there was an admiral in the family.
Okay.
And that her cousin was a princess. But we just thought she was this crazy old lady telling us stories.
Yeah, those are quite good claims to make, but it sounds like it was quite casually given. So, oh yeah, you've got a princess in the family.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That's the way it sounded. And I said, well, her cousin was a princess. I said, because her grandfather was a prince.
Okay.
Italy, probably even more so than the UK or some of the other countries. They were duchies and counties and all over Italy and all of these little city-states. Every town had a count or a duke or something like that.
Okay.
But the names were in this genealogy history, Libro di Oro, which is, I guess, the Italian book on nobility. So I was able to trace her back to the first Caracciolo, direct descendant to 950 AD through this Libro di Oro.
Blimey.
Never in a million years did I expect to find that.
No, that is a remarkable find. When you were discovering this, did you think, okay, this is great. I can get from these known relatives that I personally or my living relatives have memories of, and then there's this published set of relatives. Were you thinking, how do I verify this and how do I make sure this is correct? Was there anything that kind of made you look into that a bit further? Or
Well, yeah, sure, because I think, anybody who's doing genealogy research wants to make sure that things are accurate.
Yeah.
And what really helped me, not so much my cousins in the United States, because they said my grandmother didn't talk that much about it. But I found a cousin in Italy who was a Pio Malo.
Okay.
And I found her on Facebook. And through her, as we started putting the pieces together, we realized that, yes, indeed, this is all factual. And in fact, one of the interesting things about my great-grandparents was that the generation before them, his uncle married her aunt.
Right. Okay.
And so Cinzia and I, my cousin there, she descends from my great-grandfather's uncle and aunt also. So we're related on both sides of the family through there. And so she knew some more of the stories about it and some more of the history. And then also, one of the things that I did, I found a great person in the United States. He does charts.
Right.
And he does it for gateway ancestors that trace back, through the English, right back to the English monarchies. And I asked him, I said, I have this Italian ancestor who was a prince, Ambrosio Caracciolo. Can you do a chart for me like that? And he said, well, I'll have to research it, but let me check. And he came back and he says, yes, absolutely. He said, you have this unbelievable history. And he does charts where he puts in all the nobility on the chart rather than just, regular family members.
Yeah.
So yes, that was a long answer to your question, but yes, I did a lot of verification on it.
How were you recording your research, and how has that changed to what you're recording now throughout these years that you've been researching?
I have used Ancestry. I also put a chart out there on FamilySearch.org, which I really, really like. And I found, several other, no one of the online applications does everything that you want it to do.
No, not quite.
So yes, I've recorded it in several places, and the I forget which one it is off the top of my head, but one of the sites allows you to put your name in and an ancestor's name, and then they show you, your whole relationship going back, so that you're either third or fourth or fifth grade, whatever.
Yeah.
And one other person that also helped me in Italy just recently was a third or fourth cousin who's on the Caracciolo line. And he's done a lot of research over there. Right. So, but to your point, it's very important for people to make sure when they find it, especially something as crazy as this, to make sure that it's real,
Yeah, and I guess maybe you've done some DNA testing as well. And
yeah, sadly, the Italians don't do a lot of DNA testing. In fact, very, very little. But they don't have to. They're like the English, they know where everybody's buried in the cemetery for 500 years. So it's not important to them.
Yeah, that's me, basically, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Unlike my wife, she's half Italian and half Puerto Rican, and every Puerto Rican has done DNA testing in the United States. She's got 10,000 cousins. I got a handful. So sadly that they don't do that. But I've contacted enough people over there that we're able to piece it together. So
you're talking about contacting people up there and doing research with them. Have you been able to go over there and do research for yourself in person?
Yes, indeed. We were supposed to go the month after COVID hit. So our trip was delayed for 2.5 years almost.
Yeah.
But there was a blessing there, and I don't believe anything happens by accident. I think when the people are doing genealogy research, things just pop up at the weirdest time.
Yep.
And shortly before we went, through Facebook, I got a message from my dad's first half cousin. And the interesting story there is that my great-grandfather, Nicola Piermalo, my great-grandmother died when she was 42 years old. And he remarried a woman. He was 60, she was 30. She was the same age as my grandmother.
Right, okay.
And he had another family with her.
Yep.
2 daughters that were basically my father's age. And Nicola is actually younger than me. And he met us there and took us to the cemetery where his grandfather, my great-grandfather, was buried. And then he took us to the home of my dad's two first cousins that I never knew existed.
Wow. Okay.
I had these women, they were in their 90s.
Yeah.
And I walked into the apartment and there was an immediate connection. You felt that family connection.
Oh, that's nice.
So, yes, and then my cousin Cinzia, I did a tour with a company called Italy Rooting, Letizia Sinisi, and she brought me to some of the ancestral homes. So, Capricotta, Montebello in Calabria, and Avellino, where the princes of Avellino came from. So we got a lot of firsthand information and history from them. And I got to sit in my ninth great-grandfather's chair that he would sit in at Mass.
Wow.
In Italy, it's not like England where you can't touch anything. But yeah.
So does this mean that I should have, in the introduction, called you, I don't know, your Honour, your Grace, Duke, Lord, or what's your connection?
I like your Grace, actually. Now through this thing, I actually trace back to Rollo, the Duke of Normandy, direct, and also the Kings of England. Wow. Because the nobility and the royalty, they all married each other.
Yeah,
so
kind of tactical marriages. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I never thought that the Italians would somehow, but the Italians married the Spanish when the Spanish conquered Italy, and the Spanish were all married to the French and the English and all of that kind of stuff. I didn't know the first time I went to England in 1986 that I went and went to Westminster and saw the kings that were buried there, that they were my grandfathers.
I bet you didn't get to touch those either, those monuments.
No.
So having amassed all of this research, at what point did you decide that you ought to turn this research into a book?
Well, I started the blog to kind of tell my story, which was interesting, but that was one-sided, and that's why I started doing the podcast. But I wanted to do the book because my parents come from two vastly different socioeconomic groups from Italy. Okay. Of course, they met in America. They were born in America. My dad, his mother was of nobility, and my mom's family were farmers from Torito Bari. And, I was able to trace them back to about 1750. But I wanted to give my story and how I did my research and how important it is for people to know where they come from. So there's a little bit of that in there. And I found these people that I found in Italy fascinating because we know so much about the nobility from places like England and Spain and France, but very, very little is written about the Italian nobles.
Okay. And I guess it must have been very different research for you to research the side of your family that was not nobility.
Yes. And I was lucky in that it must have been one of the early places that they started filming the documents in Italy. Because my mom's family, almost the whole town is recorded on FamilySearch.org. So, and in the Antenati as a result of that. So, and the Antenati, for people who don't know, is a website in Italy where they have all the records filmed and indexed. So not all, but they've been doing that.
Yeah.
So I was able to trace them back, like I said, to about 1750 through that research. And when you're researching Italian families, it's very interesting. I think one of the more interesting things is the Italians have this naming convention where they always name the oldest son after the paternal grandfather.
Okay.
And I found one family, my mom's uncle, Dominic. There were 4 Dominics before him from the same parents. So you would think after a few tries, they would say, hey, this name's not working out. But no, they kept going.
Do the next one. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So when you started writing this book, did you find that your family or your relatives were fascinated as to what you're going to put in it? Or were they anxious about what you were going to put in it?
That's a good question. Most of them could care less. There were some that are interested, but I think with all of us who have this, for lack of a better word, calling to do genealogy, there's 1 or 2 in every family. And everybody else is kind of sort of interested if you come up with something neat. But for the most part, they're like, you're looking for dead people again?
Yes, of course you're looking for dead people.
Right, that's the whole point.
It is, yes. So what do you think that the genealogy industry or the community could do better?
I think if there was one thing that I would say that they could do better is educating people on how important it is to know your backstory.
Yeah.
Like I said, I find that fascinating because I feel that I'm somehow part of that history. And maybe that sounds weird, but I feel very, very connected to these people I found. And I think in some ways, especially, when you think about some of the people that I found and how important they were in history, I look back at them and I say, boy, I have some of the traits of this guy, Good or bad. Mostly bad, but...
There's always at least one colourful character waiting to be found in our family trees. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, or sometimes they're just plain ugly. But it's down to you as a family historian to unravel their story. It's therefore time for my guest to choose one of their most fascinating relatives and share their life story. So, Bob, who are you going to introduce us to?
The person I chose was Isabella De Este.
Okay.
I've had so many colorful characters going back, through all these years. But the reason I chose her was, I guess, twofold. The first one was I had never heard of her before. Never knew who she was. And the second reason was she was such an important person during the Renaissance in Italy that I just found her so fascinating. And again, that's why I chose her. She was what I would refer to as the Jackie Kennedy of the Renaissance period.
Okay.
Yeah. She funded the works of people like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. She was very, very well educated. So unlike most of the women of that time, her family believed in educating women, which wasn't the norm back then.
What kind of dates are we talking here?
We're talking about probably from the mid-1400s to the mid-1500s, somewhere around there.
So that was very unusual to be so well educated and be a woman at that time.
Absolutely, yeah. But, like I said, her parents believed in it. And that family was a quite wealthy and well-known family. They were from Ferrara, and her parents were Ercole d'Este from Ferrara and Eleonora di Aragona, who was the daughter of King Ferrante of Naples, and Ferrante was quite a character.
Oh, I see. I'll look him up.
Like I said, she was educated. She always knew that she was going to have to marry somebody from high standing, and she was betrothed to Francesco Gonzaga II, who was an Italian mercenary at the time. I think he wasn't, for that time, he wasn't that much older than her, maybe only about 8 years. But she was betrothed at the age of 6.
Oh no.
And got married at the age of 15.
Oh, not much better.
And they wound up having 5 children. And the interesting thing about her also was because he was a mercenary and always fighting a battle somewhere in Italy, hired out to one of the city-states, she basically ran the fiefdoms. And from what history says, she actually did a better job than him.
Good on her, yeah.
He didn't want to rule per se. He just wanted to go out there and, fight these battles and things like that. So while he was out there fighting battles, she was bringing in art and culture to Mantua and, hiring these famous painters and musicians and things like that.
Wow. So she must have amassed quite a collection.
Yes. And in fact, they still have, I think it's some 20,000 letters that she wrote or she received. Somebody, I don't recall the person's name, but somebody wrote a book about that. She was very prolific in, writing, people back and forth. The other interesting thing about this couple, and they're so intertwined, and her husband, Francesco, he was the lover of Lucretia Borgia, who was the daughter of the Pope.
Okay, there's a few questions there.
Yes, indeed.
She was married, she had a lover, and there's a Pope connection. Yeah, there's some interesting things to unpick.
Yeah, so Francesco and Isabella were married. Her husband, Lucretia Borgia, was the daughter, and I didn't know this until actually we saw the series, but Pope Alexander, who was originally a Spanish pope, he had lots of children. One of them was Lucretia Borgia.
Okay.
And she then eventually became one of the lovers of Francesco Gonzaga.
I see. Was that accepted?
About the Pope having kids or the affair or...
Well, both, really. The probably both. I mean...
It wasn't unusual for the popes back then to have illegitimate children.
Okay.
And in fact, the other interesting part about Pope Alexander, his girlfriend was Julia Farnese. She had a brother, Alessandro, who was made a cardinal by Alexander. He later became pope, and he's a grandfather, so he had illegitimate children also.
Okay. So what kind of effect did this have on Isabella then?
I think she just kind of went with the flow. That's the way it was back then, I suppose.
Okay.
When you think about the nobility, right, there was always something going on with them. And the higher up they went, there was more going on. So I think it was kind of more or less accepted. She was a very strong woman, and I guess she just went with the flow, I suppose. He was never around. Oh, because the women would have lovers too, and I haven't seen that she did. It's possible. And that's why I think she was way, way, way ahead of her time, because she was very much into women having power and, involving women in things and things like that.
Which I guess partly would stem from the fact that she was having to do everything because her husband was away being a mercenary.
Yeah, exactly. She converted her home into shelter for needy people. She was just like a superwoman, of the Italian Renaissance. When I found out about her, I was so proud that even though we're, 300 or 400 years apart, that I found somebody like this in my history, because like I said, some of the men weren't very nice guys.
Yeah. Must have been relief to find her and find that she's much more interested in the arts and the music. And yeah, she seems to have contributed maybe perhaps more than some of them.
Yeah. And like I said, I think that's one of the sad things about some of at least the Italian history, that we don't know more about people like her and her contribution to just the world in general, I suppose. And especially, with women, because like I said, she was way ahead of her time as far as that went.
Yeah. Did her and Francesco have lots of children?
They had 5.
Okay.
Their daughter became the Duchess of Urbino. Their son Federico he succeeded his father as the Marquis. And then they had another son, Ercole, who became, he was a cardinal of the Catholic Church. Probably had girlfriends, as most of them did. The way it worked I guess it's the same as it worked in England, right? The first son got everything. The daughters had to marry somebody, and usually the other sons would either be soldiers or, priests.
The phrase I've often heard is you need an heir and a spare.
Yes. Well, and then you think about, all this divine right kind of stuff and everything, right? It's so strange to us, right?
So what became of Isabella? How did she live out the rest of her life?
After her husband died, I think she kind of lived a quiet life. Obviously, her son, wound up taking over. Mm-hmm. She died in 1539. So, she was 60-ish, I guess, somewhere in that vicinity. But yeah, she was very, once her husband died, she was kind of very low-key.
And did he meet a grisly end, or did he die peacefully somewhere?
Well, he died peacefully, I guess, if you want to say so. He died of syphilis.
Okay. Yeah.
So I don't know if that's peaceful or
no,
not.
I should imagine that's so peacefully, but yeah. Not quite grisly end either, but yeah, somewhere in between, I think.
Yeah. Those guys got around,
Well, thank you, Bob, for telling us the story of Isabella. But I think it's now time for you to face
the brick wall.
Those moments where the research trail comes to an unexpected halt are what we call brick walls, often lasting for what feels like forever. However, sometimes all it takes is a little bit of different thinking to find a way through. And with that in mind, it's now time for us to hear one of my guests' brick walls, in a hope that one of you, dear listeners, might just be able to solve it. Right, Bob, what have you got for us?
So my brick wall is my fourth and fifth great-grandparents from a town in Italy called Carpinone.
Okay.
My fourth great-grandmother, Maria Angela De Riso, married the Duke of Capricotta. She was I guess a baroness or whatever in her own right. And what I found was I found her father, but it ends there. I can't figure out where they came from. Carpinone is a small town in the region of Italy called Molise, and just a brick wall there.
Oh, what, like completely nothing?
It's just kind of ends, which is unusual for some of these families. And the only thing I could think of is, in Italy, you could buy your way into some of this nobility, and I suspect that's maybe what happened.
Yeah, maybe.
But then on the other hand, there is De Riso link somehow to Bari, Italy, but I can't match it all up. So I don't know if they bought their way in, or if they were if her father was the son of somebody and then he bought it, because that's what they would do. They would basically buy a town.
As you do, yep.
Yeah, it's so I'm kind of stumped there.
And what sort of dates are we talking for Marie?
She lived from around 1750 till about 1815 or so.
Okay.
And in actuality, her story is very interesting in that she died in Paris. And there was a story from Capricotta about her. She left her family and married a French soldier. And then when Napoleon took over Italy, she was kind of like persona non grata. But then they do show that she lived in Paris and had a stipend from the French government for several years.
Okay.
So she left her husband for the French soldier before Napoleon came into Italy. And then he wound up passing away.
Right, okay.
But yeah, so she died she was born in Italy, died in Paris. And the only other little bit of information that I have was one of her, I think her nephew, contested a will because her uncle, who had the title from Carpinone, he had no heirs. He had no male heirs. Actually, he had no heirs. And he stipulated that the only person who could inherit his wealth was somebody by the name of De Riso.
Right, yep, okay.
And she was the only one, which, again, unusual for somebody in Italy, or a woman in Italy, to inherit, right? And there's this will that Family Search found for me, or contestation of a will, like 43 pages long, where this person is saying, well, I'm a De Riso too, and she shouldn't have the money. But she actually won the case.
Okay, wow. So how are we spelling De Riso for those who want to have a little search?
It's, D-E with a space, R-I-S-O.
Oh, that wasn't quite how I was imagining it, but that's D-E space R-I-S-O.
Yeah.
What's the best way for listeners to contact you if they think that they have a research clue or idea?
The best place would be on probably my Facebook group, Italian Roots and Genealogy. That's also the name of the YouTube channel. But yeah, the best place would be, sign up for the Facebook group. We have almost 12,000 people in the group now.
Wow, okay.
And so if you're Italian and you're researching your roots, a good place to go. Everybody's very, very helpful there. Translating or helping you, get to the bottom of a brick wall. Lots of help there.
Wonderful. Well, we'll put links to those in the show notes for this episode, which listeners can find if they head over to familyhistoriespodcast.com. And they can also send us a message if they want to help Bob at our website, or they can email us at hello@familyhistoriespodcast.com. And of course, we'll pass that right along. Now, as our listeners finish frantically scribbling their notes, I think that I might just be able to help you with this, Bob, but you're going to need to follow me through to the garage.
I can't wait.
Here we are.
Oh, wow. Look at it.
I know. It's wonderful, isn't it?
This is quite something.
Oh, thank you.
What is it?
Oh, well, it's my secret time machine. And this is my assistant, Sándor Petőfi.
Hello.
You mean the Hungarian poet?
Yes, the very one.
But he's from the 1800s.
As I said, time machine. And if you'd like to, maybe you'd like a little return trip to try to solve your brick wall for yourself. You know, you could ask Maria your questions directly, if you want.
That wasn't what I expected, but sure, that would be fantastic.
Excellent. Now, if you take a seat over there, Bob, Sándor and I will get everything set up. What's the best date and place for you to go back to, though, to try to solve this? Somewhere in France, perhaps?
Paris, 1805 is where I need to be.
3rd of April looks good, actually. A bit of sunshine. I'm quite envious. There we go, all set.
You need this temporal beacon.
What does this do?
That temporal beacon tells me when and where you are in time. And then, when you press that button on the top... No, don't press it now. It brings you right back here at roughly the same moment that you left.
Well, if it really works, let's do it.
We are all set.
Perfect timing. Okay, here we go. Bob Sorrentino. Thank you, goodbye, and good luck.
Oh no.
What do you mean, oh no? Oh, 1792. The French Revolution. I hope he doesn't mention his royal connections. The Family Histories podcast was presented and produced by me, Andrew Martin. My guest was the brilliant Bob Sorrentino, with John Spike as Sándor Petőfi. If you've enjoyed this episode, then why not leave us a rating or review? Thank you for listening. Approximately no family historians were harmed in the making of this podcast.